5:23 in the morning, Gulf of Oman. The sky is still black. A San Antonio-class amphibious ship is holding a course through flat water with the kind of steadiness that only comes from a plan written weeks in advance. Her position isn't improvised. Those coordinates were selected, checked, and locked long before this ship ever arrived here. Up on the flight deck, 4 HIMARS. Launcher pods sit chained down and angled northwest, pointed at nothing a human eye can see, just darkness, and behind that darkness, Iran. 400 kilometers inland past the coast, past the mountains, the Bampur military complex is asleep. Inside those barracks is an Iranian mechanized brigade. For the past month, these men have been sending missiles and drones out into the Gulf and watching them fly with almost no consequence. They believe distance is armor. They believe the interior of their own country is a place American weapons don't reach. Not one of them knows that every building in that compound was measured and assigned a number in an American targeting file weeks ago. Not one of them will hear anything before it happens. Then the first pod lights. If this kind of breakdown is what you came for, hit like and subscribe. This channel does deep dive military and geopolitical analysis you won't get from a news chyron. Now, let's get into what happened next. A solid rocket booster catches inside the launch cell. Orange and white fire blows out against the black. The airframe shakes as 400 pounds of thrust shoves it past the ship's rail and tips it over toward the Iranian coastline. 2 seconds pass. The pod beside it cycles. Another column of flame, then a third, then a fourth. Almost no Navy on this planet trains for what is happening right now. Most have never seriously attempted it. Most don't own the weapons. Most don't have the doctrine written down anywhere. The Americans do, and they do it because they figured out something structural about air defense. Not about radars or missiles, but about how defensive systems are wired together and how long they take to make a decision. That single insight is what reshaped this entire strike. 100 kilometers west, along Iran's coastal ridge, an air defense crew is already watching the heat bloom. Their radar caught those booster flares. The instant they appeared, here's the thing worth understanding. The same infrared flash that lit up every American sensor in the Gulf lit up every Iranian sensor on the coast at the exact same instant. Light doesn't play favorites. Seeing first means nothing when everyone sees simultaneously. The fire control computer at that site starts running its regression, tracing each rising target, backward, down through the atmosphere until the math converges on one small square of ocean. Launch point. Solved. But a launch point isn't a place. It's a moment. That ship is doing 25 knots. Every minute the targeting cycle burns, the ship slides nearly half a mile further away from the answer. The Iranian crew works the procedure exactly as written. They know their jobs. They perform them properly. The problem isn't the crew. The problem is that everything above them in the hierarchy moves at a completely different tempo. At Air Defense Headquarters in Tehran and at the regional command centers, every solution has to be approved. Every approval needs a second confirmation. Every confirmation has to be pushed back down the chain as an order. By the time permission clears and the numbers reach a launcher, that American ship has repositioned, and the missiles are already at the midpoint of their flight. Iran is still asking whether it may shoot while the warheads are descending. That gap, permission versus physics, decides the next 30 minutes. So let's talk about the weapon making it possible. PRSM, the Precision Strike Missile. The newest ballistic weapon in the American inventory, built specifically to retire a predecessor that, as of this morning, is essentially museum inventory. The numbers explain the decision. Effective range past 310 kilometers, wider than several countries are across. Terminal speed around Mach 3, roughly 3,000 miles an hour, close to a kilometer every second. Guidance is a ring laser inertial measurement unit paired with a GPS receiver that refreshes its position once per second, continuously scrubbing out error. Warhead. A single high explosive charge sitting behind a fuse that has a very particular, very deliberate job. And we'll come back to that fuse, because it's the strangest detail in this entire operation. And here's the change that mattered most. Each pod holds 2 PRSM rounds. The system it replaced held 1. The Pentagon somehow produced a program that came in early, came in under budget, and doubled the magazine. Congress is still trying to identify who to congratulate for cost overruns that turned into savings. But the missile isn't the revolution. How it arrives is. Your physics teacher drew you the ballistic arc. Object goes up, hits apogee, comes down in a mirror image of the way it climbed. Clean parabola, predictable, beautiful. That predictability is the defender's entire advantage. Against a classic ballistic track, the impact point is knowable from the moment of burnout. The computer finds the burnout, projects the descending curve, and there's your answer. The trajectory is a promise the missile can't break. PRSM doesn't make that promise. It flies what engineers call a quasi-ballistic profile. Energy is actively managed the whole way. It stays lower than the textbook arc on the climb. And here's the part that dismantles air defense math. It maneuvers throughout the descent. It isn't falling, it's flying down. It's steering all the way to the ground. The defender is no longer catching a dropped stone. He's catching a stone that keeps arguing with him about where it's going. Now watch the clock, because the clock is the whole weapon. 13 missiles, 40 seconds of launching, 10 seconds of arriving. The crew staggers each shot by a few seconds, walking the fire down the deck. Each round takes a slightly different path, different descent angles, different banking through the thin air up high. All of it computed, so that 13 separate flights collapse into one 10-second window at the far end. Think of mailing 13 letters from 13 different post offices across a city and engineering all of them to land in the same mailbox during the same minute. That's time on target. Artillery crews have been refining that idea for generations. And in this case, it's the reason this fight was decided weeks ago in a planning room in Tampa, Florida, where American planners war-gamed every Iranian response. Because give a defender 13 threats spread out over several minutes, and you've given him 13 separate chances to succeed. Even if he misses all 13, he got 13 attempts. Compress those same 13 into one 10-second window, and he gets exactly one attempt. And that single attempt gets eaten alive by the decision of which 3 or 4 targets to even try for, while the other 10 warheads slide past his intercept altitude and become unstoppable. There's a bill for shaping an attack this way, and someone has to pay it. To fly trajectories that converge that precisely, the launch platform can't jink. For 40 seconds, that ship has to hold a straight, unwavering heading across open water. Straight lines are exactly what 20th century targeting was invented to punish. Iran's College-Fars coastal anti-ship ballistic missile can reach hundreds of kilometers out from shore. The American captain understands that math completely. He stands there and watches pod after pod cycle while his wake draws a ruler straight line behind him. And 13 white pillars climb into the pre-dawn sky. The instant the final hatch closes and the deck reports firing complete, the hull rolls into a hard turn to starboard and the ship runs south at full power. He gives up his freedom of maneuver for exactly as long as the mission requires. And he takes it back the second it's no longer needed. 300 kilometers north, the Iranian coastal defense cell finally finishes its firing solution. It's beautifully calculated. It points at an empty patch of water. The ship it describes stopped existing at that coordinate 40 seconds ago, and the missiles it was supposed to answer are already halfway to their target. But those 13 contrails were not private. They bend inland, fanning out like the ribs of an opening hand across the sky, and they are visible to the most crowded waterway on the planet. Phone video from merchant ship bridge wings hits news desks before the warheads reach the Iranian coast. Nobody filming needed a classified brief to work out whose flag just fired inland. In effect, the Americans announced themselves to the world in real time. So what does Iran actually have to work with? 2 radars matter here. The first is SEPER, an over-the-horizon system. It transmits in high frequency and skips its signal off the ionosphere at 200 to 400 kilometers up, letting it look past the curve of the Earth, theoretically out to 3,000 kilometers. Physics never gives that for free. The ionosphere shifts constantly, so the bounce path shifts with it. Range accuracy degrades to somewhere between 20 and 40 kilometers of uncertainty. Bearing drifts a degree or two, which at that distance adds another 50 kilometers of error. And the picture only refreshes once every 30 to 60 seconds. In a fight measured in seconds, that's the equivalent of hearing thunder and knowing a storm exists somewhere without knowing which cloud to shoot. The SEPER operator does precisely what doctrine tells him. Flash report, straight up the chain. Southern sector, ballistic launch detected, count unknown. Then he passes along the one genuinely valuable thing his radar can produce, the exact second the launch occurred. A time hack. That's the ceiling of what a smeared picture can give. Whether anyone downstream converts it into a defense is a question far above his console. 35 seconds in, a second system comes up. In a fence compound in southeastern Iran, a massive steel lattice sweeps the southern sky. This is the Ghadir Array, the sharpest long-range eye Iran owns. 1,100 kilometers of reach. The entire southern coast falls inside its field of view, and unlike SEPER, Ghadir builds real 3-dimensional tracks with altitude included. Not guesswork in 2 dimensions, actual position in 3. But early warning is not a firing solution, and the distinction is everything. A firing solution requires bearing accurate to 1/10 of a degree, range accurate to 100 meters, and refreshes every 1 or 2 seconds without interruption. Early warning radars were designed to tell you something is coming, not to walk an interceptor onto it. Ghadir is a lighthouse, a very powerful one. It can tell you roughly where a ship sits in dark water. It cannot aim the shot. Only a small fire control radar riding right next to you can do that. And this morning, that radar hasn't been told anything because the command network is still confirming, still verifying, still asking. This is the moment the battle stops being about physics and becomes about paperwork. Total flight time is roughly 5 minutes. The data has to travel from the Ghadir site to National Air Defense Headquarters in Tehran, then from Tehran to a regional sector command, then from sector command to an actual battery with interceptors physically sitting on rails. Every one of those hops costs 30 seconds or more in confirmations, cross-checks, and authorizations that require a signature. It's a smoke alarm wired to a fire department that won't dispatch a truck without a notarized letter. The Ghadir crew performs flawlessly. The system above them is the brake. It moves at the speed of permission, and permission is losing a race against mathematics. On the American side, the same sequence runs in an entirely different universe. Sensor to shooter takes seconds. The network handles verification automatically. The only human judgment required was the decision to strike, and that was made weeks earlier in a briefing room. The Iranian architecture demands a human at every junction. By the time an order finally lands on a battery commander's desk, 90 of the 300 seconds are gone. A third of the battle is over before anything has been fired. At 90 seconds, something dramatic happens above the Gulf. The last booster burns out. 13 exhaust plumes stop, one after another, and the contrails simply end in the air like chalk lines snapped off against a ruler. From the ground, the entire salvo vanishes. No flame left to track. No heat plume for an infrared seeker to drink. 13 dark objects, each narrower than a telephone pole, coasting upward on momentum alone. The air thins. 50 kilometers up, the sky goes black in daylight, and the curve of the earth shows at the edges. Below them, the Gulf of Oman is beaten silver in the first light. The Iranian coast slides underneath. From here on, only math and satellites know where these things are. Then the noses tip over. Small fins bite whatever atmosphere exists at that height. Each airframe rolls a few degrees, trims itself, and settles into its own private descent. 13 different answers to one shared arrival time. The arcs flatten. This is where the quasi-ballistic design collects on its investment. These warheads aren't dropping. They traded speed for altitude on the way up, and now they're taking that speed back with interest. On the way down, accelerating toward a compound that still hasn't heard a sound. Ahead of them, one Iranian battery finally comes alive with a purpose. A Tor M2B, third corded family. Nobody should mistake these for junk. Systems in this class have knocked down dozens of American surveillance drones over the course of this conflict. This one sits directly on the approach corridor, between the coast and Bampur base. The radar is turning. The crew is strapped in. 12 interceptors sit ready across 3 launcher vehicles. For the next 2 minutes, none of that matters, because the salvo is crossing a band of sky the Tor M2B physically cannot enter. The commander watches altitude numbers arriving from Ghadir across the network display. His expression doesn't change. Around him sit the vehicles that make the system work. Command cab, transporter, erector, launcher, with one chassis carrying both the launch rails and the X-band fire control radar. That radar is sharp enough to actually shoot with, out to roughly 50 kilometers. But his interceptors top out somewhere between 25 and 30 kilometers of altitude. The entire middle of the American flight profile sits above that ceiling. 3 miles of sky he cannot touch. The long-range batteries that used to cover this corridor were removed months ago, one at a time, during earlier American strikes. The Americans peeled Iran's air defense apart in layers until only medium-range systems were left standing here. The only piece of the flight he can reach is the bottom of the dive, and his console is already telling him how brief that will be. The cab is quiet, the way crews go quiet before a fight they know they've already lost on paper. Cooling fans, an operator murmuring track counts. Outside the armored glass, 3 loaded rails point at a stretch of sky that will remain empty for 2 more minutes, no matter what anyone in that vehicle does. He works the clock backward from the Sapir time hack. Launch second plus 300 seconds of flight. Subtract 20 to 30 seconds for his interceptors to climb into the engagement zone. Subtract network lag and authorization delay. What's left is about 40 usable seconds. 40 seconds. 13 inbound targets. A fire control computer that can put 2 interceptors onto each of 4 targets at once. 4 channels. 13 guests arriving simultaneously at a kitchen with 4 burners. He can read the ending off the panel before a single missile leaves the rail. Even with perfect shooting, every shot connecting, 9 interceptors cannot answer 13 maneuvering warheads that arrive together. And no shot at a maneuvering quasi-ballistic warhead is ever perfect. Proximity fuses have to detonate inside a lethal radius, and that radius shrinks fast against a target that refuses to hold still. He knows the arithmetic. He fires anyway, because 9 interceptors on the rail beats 0. That's what professionals do with impossible math. They execute. 2 minutes to impact. The salvo drops through 30 kilometers. 2 interceptors come off the rails and lean east on the wind, supersonic in seconds. Each Tor M2B is a serious weapon. Radar guided the entire way. Fragmentation warhead, proximity fuse, close to Mach 4 terminal. Range past 50 kilometers on paper. Range was never the issue this morning. The ceiling was. Launch dust drifts across the cab panels. The operator counts down the intercept, the only voice inside the vehicle, while the geometry falls apart. 2 interceptors climbing at Mach 3 into warheads descending at Mach 3 on a crossing angle. Every second, the triangle between them redraws itself. Every second, the warheads nudge sideways, ruining the solution faster than the seeker can rebuild it. Imagine catching a penny thrown off a rooftop while riding an elevator up. And someone keeps flicking the penny sideways on its way down. High up, 2 small blooms of fire open behind the salvo. The fuses functioned exactly as designed, at exactly the calculated point, which is exactly where the targets were half a second earlier. All 13 tracks keep falling. The smoke thins out. Nothing changes. The battery cycles 2 more away. Same collapsing geometry, maybe 100 meters closer. Same result. 2 perfect detonations behind targets that had already moved. 4 rails empty, 5 interceptors left. The reload cycle can't finish a third engagement before the window closes for good. The commander watches the last usable second pass in, with his hands still resting on the console. It's finished. And not finished this morning. Finished weeks ago in a room when American planners decided that 13 trajectories landing inside 10 seconds was worth more than 13 missiles arriving one at a time. Everything this crew did was execution against a verdict already handed down by arithmetic. His report goes up while the last airburst is still fading. Engagement complete. 4 interceptors expended. 0 targets destroyed. Wave still inbound on Bampur. Honest numbers, sent fast. Then he orders all 3 vehicles to displace immediately because doctrine says the Americans come hunting for batteries that shoot. And the barracks were never the only thing on the list. The second San Antonio-class ship, sister to the first, begins her own ripple launch. Pods rise in sequence down the deck. Boosters punch white columns into the morning 2 seconds apart. 6 missiles this time. She holds her line under 6 rising flares, then rolls hard to starboard, carving a hook into the water while the smoke is still climbing. 6 missiles, 1 straight line, gone in under 20 seconds. These arcs bend northeast, toward completely different coordinates. A rail junction west of the province. Time on target, 0530 exactly. Armor travels by rail. The only broad gauge line feeding this province runs through that junction. Crater a switching yard, and you're looking at weeks to months of work. Relaying track, replacing ballast, before anything heavier than a light truck can move through it. The alternative is more than 500 kilometers of 2-lane mountain highway that nobody wants to drive empty, let alone loaded with military equipment. So this was never a barracks raid. This is the United States taking away an entire province's ability to be reinforced. The Navy didn't come here to kill soldiers. It came to break the logistics spine of the region. And here's a detail that should stop you. Those 13 warheads falling on Bampur have never seen anything. There is no seeker in the nose, no camera, not so much as a pinhole. The guidance section rides behind the warhead like a pilot flying blind on instruments and arithmetic alone. The ring laser inertial unit counts every motion across 5 minutes of flight and accumulates drift measured in tens of meters. The GPS receiver updates once a second and erases that drift. Picture a marching band that never lifts its eyes from the sheet music. Every step counted, every turn rehearsed. And a voice on the radio correcting the formation once per second. Satellites surveyed these aim points to roughly 1 meter. The dormitory blocks at Bampur are 30 to 50 meters across. The circle each missile lands inside is smaller than the building it's aimed at. Seekers earn their weight when targets move, hide, or change shape. Barracks do none of those things. A seeker here would be dead weight. But there's one thing in the nose that no specification sheet explains. The fuse is programmed with a delay, and nothing in the public description of this weapon says what that delay is waiting for. Down at the compound, nobody hears a thing. That's not dramatic writing, it's arithmetic. At Mach 3 in the lower atmosphere, each missile covers about 1,000 meters per second. Sound at Bampur's elevation manages 330. The shock cone trails behind the airframe, spread only about 19 degrees off its path. A narrow bow wave. The sound arrives after the warhead does. Lightning before thunder. Except here, the flash is the missile. Every kilometer of altitude the corded couldn't reach converts directly into silent speed. The first sound the sentries hear is their own guns firing. A 4-barrel mount inside the compound picks up an automated radar cue. No human ever saw the track. The computer caught the dive and threw every barrel at it. Recoil hammers down through the support legs. This is the Mezbah-1, Iran's point defense gun descended from the Soviet Zu-23 line. 423mm barrels in one block, close to 4,000 rounds a minute every round on a contact fuse. It detonates when it hits something or it doesn't detonate at all. 2 streams of fire converge on empty air. Brass rains off the mount. The computer knows the answer. The steel simply can't get there in time. At 0528, the lead missile buries itself. In the northern dormitory block of the 388th Mechanized Infantry Brigade. The first thing that building meets is not the explosive. It's the missile, hundreds of pounds of spent airframe traveling a kilometer per second. That impact is what the fuse delay was waiting for. The airframe punches through the masonry roof. and only then does the main charge fire inside the structure. Every joule stays in the building. Within 10 seconds, the other 12 arrive. The compound disappears under a rolling gray curtain lit from within. Here's the part Tehran understood immediately. For the entire month before this morning, every American target inside Iran belonged to the Revolutionary Guard. The men at Bampur were not IRGC. They were Artesh, the regular conventional army, deeper inland than anything struck before. Hit by a ship that was already over the horizon and running before the warning reached the second node in the chain, that distinction lands hard. Iran's interior is no longer geography. It's just distance, and distance has been solved. The Americans can reach 300, and 10 kilometers inland, further than Iran can reliably see. And when 13 missiles land inside 10 seconds, no air defense system currently deployed can answer them. None of this was luck. American planners spent months taking Iran's defensive layers apart deliberately, one battery at a time, until only the medium-range systems were left. Bampur simply exposed the mismatch that was already there. The Tor M2B couldn't climb high enough. 9 interceptors were never going to be enough against 13 simultaneous maneuvering targets. The outcome existed before the first shot, and the fleet is still out there. Roughly 40 missiles per ship. That's the sentence that matters most. This wasn't a demonstration. It's repeatable. It's systematic. It can be done again tomorrow and the day after that. Everyone is watching. Europe, Russia, China. All of them running the same private calculation about whether their own defenses would perform any differently. Iran's options come down to 2, and neither one is real. Deny the Americans access to the Gulf entirely, or field an air defense network that reaches 310 kilometers and reacts in 10 seconds. That leaves acceptance. Geography didn't protect them. Doctrine didn't protect them. Their air defenses performed exactly as designed and still didn't protect them. That's the world Tehran woke up to this morning. If this breakdown was worth your time, hit like and subscribe for more analysis on the conflicts reshaping global power. And tell me in the comments, what should Iran's next move actually be? And does a strike like this make escalation more likely or less? I read them, and the conversation down there is usually the best part.